As I sit at my desk, the soft hum of the city outside my window, I can't help but reflect on the journey that led me to this point. My name is Miguel Vasquez, and I am a history teacher at a local community college. But this story isn't just about me. It's about the extraordinary friendship I formed with a man named Elliot Brooks, and the incredible cases we solved together. I first met Elliot Brooks shortly after I moved to the United States from Mexico, seeking a healthier life and new opportunities. Elliot was already a well-known private detective, his reputation for solving complex cases preceding him. Our paths crossed one evening at a local cafe, where we struck up a conversation about history and detective work. It didn't take long for us to realize that we shared a mutual passion for uncovering the truth and a keen interest in solving mysteries. Elliot had an uncanny ability to read people, to see beyond the surface and understand their motivations with little more than a glance. His skills in martial arts, self-defense, and observation made him a formidable force, and I quickly became fascinated by his work. Our bond grew stronger with each case we tackled together, and it wasn't long before we became fast friends and trusted partners. Throughout the years, we have faced numerous challenges and unraveled countless mysteries. But one case in particular stands out in my mind. A case that took us deep into the heart of Blackwood Manor and uncovered a web of deceit, betrayal, and tragedy that spanned generations. Today, I want to share with you the story of the Ghost of Blackwood Manor, a case that began in 1971 and took us through a journey of discovery, danger, and ultimately, justice. It all started with a letter, a mysterious death, and a haunted mansion that held secrets long buried in the shadows of the past. Join me as I recount the events that unfolded, the clues we uncovered, and the resolution that brought peace to the restless spirits of Blackwood Manor. This is a story of murder, mystery, thriller, and suspense. A tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat and remind you that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, can always be brought to light. It was a brisk autumn afternoon when we received the letter that would change everything. I was in my small office at the community college, grading history papers, when the door creaked open. Elliot Brooks, my friend and esteemed detective, stood in the doorway, holding an envelope with the Blackwood family crest. "Miguel, you need to see this," Elliot said, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. I set down my pen and took the envelope from him, noting the elegant seal. The Blackwoods were a well-known family in rural Virginia, their history steeped in grandeur and tragedy. My curiosity piqued. I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The elegant handwriting and formal tone immediately caught my attention. "Dear Mr. Brooks and Mr. Vasquez, it is with great respect that I write to you regarding the recent passing of Charles Blackwood, the last heir to Blackwood Manor. Mr. Blackwood's death was shrouded in mysterious circumstances, and we believe your expertise in investigation and history may be of great assistance. We humbly request your presence at Blackwood Manor to uncover the truth behind these unsettling events. Sincerely, Agnes Turner." The weight of the words settled over me. The opportunity to delve into the history of Blackwood Manor and unravel the mysteries surrounding it was too intriguing to pass up. "I'm in," I said, handing the letter back to Elliot. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning," he replied. "They've arranged our travel." The following day, we found ourselves on a train bound for rural Virginia. The landscape outside the window transformed from bustling cities to serene countryside, and the air grew crisper with each passing mile. Elliot was deep in thought, his sharp mind already piecing together the puzzle. As the train pulled into the small, quaint station, we disembarked, greeted by a chauffeur holding a sign with our names. He led us to a vintage black car, and we began the journey to the manor. The road wound through dense forests and rolling hills, the scenery growing more picturesque yet eerier as we approached our destination. Finally, Blackwood Manor came into view, its imposing silhouette standing tall against the backdrop of the setting sun. The manor was a grand, Gothic structure with ivy-clad walls and towering spires. Its grandeur was tempered by an air of neglect, as if the passing years had taken a toll on its once proud facade. The iron gates creaked open, and the car rolled up the gravel driveway, coming to a stop in front of the main entrance. We stepped out and took a deep breath, the crisp air filling our lungs. Ms. Agnes Turner, the caretaker, stood at the top of the steps, her stern expression softened by a touch of weariness. She was a woman of advanced age, with silver hair neatly tied into a bun and sharp eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor, Mr. Brooks, Mr. Vasquez." She greeted us with a curt nod. "I'm Agnes Turner. Thank you both for coming." "It's an honor to be here, Miss Turner," Elliot replied, shaking her hand. "We're eager to learn more about the manor and the circumstances of Mr. Blackwood's death. Please come inside. I'll show you to your rooms," she said, leading the way through the massive double doors. The interior of the manor was a striking contrast to its exterior. Despite the signs of age, the grand foyer was adorned with opulent chandeliers, intricate woodwork, and priceless antiques. The walls were lined with portraits of Blackwood ancestors, their stern gazes following us as we walked. Miss Turner led us up a sweeping staircase and down a long corridor to 2 spacious guest rooms. Each room was tastefully furnished with a 4-poster bed, a writing desk, and a cozy armchair by the window. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the rooms. "I've taken the liberty of preparing the rooms for your stay," Miss Turner said. "Dinner will be served in the dining room at 7. In the meantime, feel free to explore the manor." "Thank you, Miss Turner," Elliot replied. "We'll see you at dinner." Once she left, we took a moment to absorb our surroundings. The rooms had an old-world charm, yet there was an undeniable sense of foreboding that lingered in the air. We couldn't shake the feeling that the walls held countless untold stories, waiting to be uncovered. Eager to begin our investigation, we decided to explore the manor. As we wandered through the dimly lit corridors, we came across a library filled with leather-bound books and faded manuscripts. The musty scent of aged paper filled the air, and we couldn't resist the allure of the shelves. We pulled out a particularly old volume and began to leaf through its pages. It was a family history of the Blackwoods, detailing their rise to prominence and the many challenges they had faced over the centuries. As we read, we couldn't help but notice the recurring theme of tragedy that seemed to plague each generation. One story in particular caught our eye, a tale of a young woman named Eleanor Blackwood. According to the book, Eleanor had been accused of a heinous crime and had died under mysterious circumstances. Her spirit was said to haunt the manor, seeking vengeance for the injustice she had suffered. We closed the book, a chill running down our spines. Could Eleanor's restless spirit be connected to Charles Blackwood's death? The thought was both intriguing and unsettling. As we continued our exploration, we stumbled upon a hidden door at the end of a narrow hallway. It was slightly ajar, and curiosity got the better of us. We pushed the door open and found ourselves in a small, dimly lit room filled with old trunks and dusty furniture. In the corner of the room, partially obscured by shadows, stood a weathered wooden chest. We approached it cautiously, our hearts pounding with anticipation. The chest creaked open, revealing a collection of old letters and photographs. One photograph in particular drew our attention. It was a faded image of a young woman with sorrowful eyes, her expression hauntingly familiar. Written on the back was a single name, Eleanor. Our minds raced with possibilities. Could this be the Eleanor Blackwood from the family history? We carefully placed the photograph in my pocket, determined to learn more. As we emerged from the hidden room, the sound of a clock striking 7 echoed through the halls. It was time for dinner, and we made our way to the grand dining room. The dining room was a testament to the manor's former glory, with a long, polished table set with fine china and silverware. Miss Turner stood at the head of the table, her stern expression softened by a flicker of warmth. "Please take a seat, gentlemen," she said, gesturing to the chairs. We obliged, and moments later, a delicious meal was served. As we ate, we couldn't help but notice the faint tension in the air, as if Miss Turner was holding back something important. "Miss Turner, we came across a photograph in one of the rooms. It appears to be of Eleanor Blackwood. Can you tell us more about her?" Elliot inquired, hoping to learn more about the tragic figure. Miss Turner hesitated for a moment before speaking. Eleanor was a beloved member of the Blackwood family, but her life was marked by tragedy. She was accused of a crime she didn't commit and died under mysterious circumstances. Her spirit is said to haunt the manor, seeking justice for the wrongs she suffered. Her words confirmed what we had read earlier. Eleanor's story was a pivotal piece of the puzzle, and we were determined to uncover the truth. "Do you believe the ghost of Eleanor is connected to Charles's death?" Elliot asked, his keen eyes fixed on Miss Turner. Miss Turner's eyes darkened, and she lowered her voice. "I cannot say for certain, but the Blackwood family has always been plagued by tragedy. There are secrets within these walls that have yet to be revealed." Her cryptic response only fueled our determination. We knew that the key to solving the mystery lay in uncovering the hidden truths of Blackwood Manor. As dinner concluded, we thanked Miss Turner and made our way back to our rooms. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, and we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That night, as we lay in our beds, our minds raced with the events of the day. The photograph of Eleanor, the hidden room, and Miss Turner's ominous words all pointed to a deeper mystery waiting to be unraveled. As sleep finally claimed us, we knew that our journey into the heart of Blackwood Manor had only just begun. The first light of dawn filtered through the heavy drapes, casting a soft, golden glow across the room. I had barely slept, my mind consumed by the events of the previous day. I rose from the bed, stretched, and dressed quickly, eager to continue our investigation. Elliot was already awake, seated at the desk in his room, poring over the photograph of Eleanor Blackwood. "Morning, Miguel," he greeted me without looking up. "I've been thinking about this photograph. There's something about it that doesn't add up." "What do you mean?" I asked, joining him at the desk. Elliot handed me the photograph, pointing to a faint inscription on the back. "Look here. It's barely visible, but it looks like a date, October 12th, 1910. If Eleanor died under mysterious circumstances, this date might be significant." I examined the photograph closely, noting the delicate script. "You're right. We should start by finding out more about what happened on that date." Elliot nodded in agreement. "Let's head to the library. There might be records or newspapers from that time." We made our way down the dimly lit corridors, the silence broken only by the soft creaking of the floorboards beneath our feet. The library was as we had left it the night before, filled with the scent of aged paper and the weight of history. Elliot and I began our search, sifting through stacks of newspapers and journals. Hours passed in a blur of yellowed pages and faded ink, but our efforts were finally rewarded when Elliot discovered an article from October 12th, 1910. "Here it is," he said, holding up the newspaper. "It's an article about a scandal involving the Blackwood family. Apparently, Eleanor was accused of stealing a valuable heirloom, a diamond necklace, and it caused quite a stir in the community." I read the article over his shoulder, my eyes widening with each new detail. "It says here that Eleanor was ostracized by her family and the townsfolk. She maintained her innocence until her death, but the necklace was never found." Elliot's expression grew thoughtful. "If Eleanor was innocent, then someone else must have taken the necklace. We need to find out who had the most to gain from framing her." Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Miss Turner entered the library, her face as stern as ever. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said. "I trust you slept well?" "Good morning, Miss Turner," Elliot replied. "We found an article about Eleanor Blackwood and the scandal surrounding the diamond necklace. Do you know anything about it?" Miss Turner's eyes darkened, and she sighed heavily. "Eleanor was a dear friend of mine. She was kind-hearted and would never have stolen anything. I always believed she was framed, but I never had any proof." "Do you know who might have had a motive to frame her?" I asked. Miss Turner hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Eleanor's cousin, Victor Blackwood, had always been envious of her. He was ambitious and greedy, always looking for ways to elevate his status within the family. I wouldn't put it past him to have orchestrated the whole thing." Elliot's eyes gleamed with determination. "Thank you, Miss Turner. We'll need to investigate Victor further." With a new lead to follow, Elliot and I continued our investigation. We decided to visit the town archives to see if we could find any records or documents related to Victor Blackwood. The town archives were housed in a quaint old building near the town square. The archivist, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson, greeted us warmly and led us to a room filled with rows of neatly organized files and documents. "Feel free to look through anything you need," Mr. Thompson said. "If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," Elliot replied. "We're looking for any records or documents related to Victor Blackwood." Mr. Thompson nodded. "Victor Blackwood, let's see. He was quite a prominent figure in the community back in the day. I'll pull up what we have on him." While Mr. Thompson retrieved the records, Elliot and I continued to search through the files. We found several documents detailing Victor's business dealings and community involvement, but nothing that directly linked him to the scandal involving Eleanor. Finally, Mr. Thompson returned with a stack of documents. "Here you go. These are all the records we have on Victor Blackwood." Elliot and I pored over the documents, piecing together the puzzle of Victor's life. It became clear that he was a shrewd and calculating individual, always looking for ways to further his own interests. Among the documents, we found a letter addressed to Victor from an unknown correspondent. The letter hinted at a clandestine meeting and referenced the diamond necklace. "This could be the break we need," Elliot said, his eyes narrowing with focus. "If we can find out who wrote this letter and what they discussed, we might be able to prove that Victor framed Eleanor." With the letter in hand, we returned to Blackwood Manor. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grounds. As we approached the manor, we noticed a figure standing by Eleanor's grave. It was Miss Turner, her expression somber as she gazed at the weathered stone. Elliot and I approached quietly, not wanting to disturb her. "Miss Turner," Elliot said gently, "we found a letter that might help us prove Eleanor's innocence. It references a meeting between Victor and an unknown correspondent. Do you have any idea who might have written it?" Miss Turner turned to face us, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "Victor had many associates, but there was one man in particular who was always by his side, Samuel Hawthorne. He was Victor's right-hand man, always willing to do his dirty work." "Do you know where we might find Samuel Hawthorne?" I asked. "He lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of town," Miss Turner replied. "But be careful. Samuel is a dangerous man, and he won't hesitate to protect Victor's secrets." Elliot and I exchanged a determined glance. We knew that confronting Samuel Hawthorne was our best chance of uncovering the truth. We thanked Miss Turner and set off for the cottage. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time we arrived at Samuel Hawthorne's cottage. The small, dilapidated building was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from a single flickering lantern by the door. Elliot approached the door cautiously, his hand resting on the hilt of his cane, a concealed weapon he carried for protection. I stood beside him, ready for whatever might come. He knocked on the door, and after a tense moment, it creaked open to reveal an elderly man with a weathered face and piercing eyes. "What do you want?" Samuel growled, his voice rough and gravelly. "We're here to ask you about Victor Blackwood and the diamond necklace," Elliot said firmly. "We have reason to believe you were involved in framing Eleanor Blackwood." Samuel's eyes narrowed, and he took a step back, reaching for something behind the door. Elliot quickly stepped inside, his cane raised in a defensive stance. "Stay back," Samuel warned, his hand trembling as he held a rusty old shotgun. "We're not here to harm you," Elliot said calmly. "We just want the truth. If you have any information that can clear Eleanor's name, now is the time to share it." Samuel hesitated, his eyes darting between us and the shotgun in his hand. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he lowered the weapon and slumped into a chair. "I did what Victor asked me to," Samuel admitted, his voice filled with regret. "He wanted the necklace for himself, and he needed someone to take the fall. Eleanor was an easy target. She was kind and trusting, never suspecting that her own cousin would betray her." Elliot and I exchanged a triumphant glance. Samuel's confession was the missing piece of the puzzle we had been searching for. "Why did you go along with it?" I asked, my voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Victor had leverage over me, Samuel explained, his eyes filled with bitterness. He knew things about my past that could ruin me. I had no choice but to do as he asked. We need you to come forward with this information, Elliot said. It's the only way to clear Eleanor's name and bring justice to her memory. Samuel hesitated for a moment before nodding reluctantly. I'll do it. It's time the truth came out. With Samuel's confession in hand, we returned to Blackwood Manor, our hearts filled with a sense of accomplishment. We had uncovered the first clue in the mystery of Eleanor Blackwood's death, but we knew there was still much work to be done. As we approached the manor, the moonlight cast an eerie glow over the grounds. The shadows seemed to shift and dance, as if the spirits of the past were watching us. We couldn't shake the feeling that our investigation had awakened something ancient and restless. Back in our rooms, Elliot and I reviewed the events of the day, our minds racing with possibilities. We had uncovered a vital piece of the puzzle, but there were still many unanswered questions. The night was still and the air heavy with the promise of rain, an almost palpable pressure that seemed to mirror our own growing tension. Elliot paced the length of his room, the photograph of Eleanor clutched in his hand. We need to verify Samuel's confession, he said, his voice low and intense. If Victor orchestrated the theft and framed Eleanor, there must be more evidence. I nodded in agreement. We should search Victor's old quarters. Perhaps there are more letters or documents that can shed light on his involvement. Elliot and I made our way to the east wing of the manor, where Victor's quarters were located. The air grew colder as we approached, and the dim lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls. The door to Victor's room was locked, but Elliot produced a set of lock-picking tools from his pocket and expertly opened the door. The room was a testament to Victor's opulence and ambition. Expensive furniture, fine art, and lavish decorations filled the space. But beneath the veneer of luxury, there was an unmistakable sense of cold calculation. We began our search, carefully examining every drawer, cabinet, and hidden compartment. Our efforts were soon rewarded when Elliot discovered a hidden safe behind a painting. With deft precision, he cracked the safe open, revealing a collection of documents and a small, velvet-lined box. Inside the box was the missing diamond necklace, its brilliance undiminished by the passage of time. Elliot held it up, the jewels catching the light and casting dazzling reflections on the walls. "This is it," Elliot said, his voice filled with triumph. "The necklace that Eleanor was accused of stealing." We carefully placed the necklace back in the box and turned our attention to the documents. Among them, we found more letters exchanged between Victor and Samuel, detailing their plans to frame Eleanor and secure the necklace for themselves. Elliot's eyes gleamed with determination. "This is the evidence we needed. With these letters and Samuel's confession, we can finally clear Eleanor's name." As we gathered the evidence, a sudden noise startled us. The door to Victor's quarters creaked open, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Miss Turner, her expression a mixture of surprise and relief. "You found it," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the necklace. "All these years, I knew Eleanor was innocent. Thank you, Mr. Brooks, Mr. Vasquez." "We still have work to do," Elliot replied. "We need to present this evidence to the authorities and ensure that justice is served." Miss Turner nodded. "I'll accompany you." It's time the truth came to light. With the evidence in hand, we made our way to the local police station. The rain had begun to fall, a steady downpour that seemed to cleanse the air and wash away the years of secrets and lies. At the police station, we met with Inspector Harrison, a seasoned detective who had long harbored doubts about the Blackwood family's history. He listened intently as we presented our findings, his expression growing more serious with each new piece of evidence. "This is compelling evidence," Inspector Harrison said, his voice steady. "With Samuel Hawthorne's confession and these documents, we can finally clear Eleanor Blackwood's name." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The news of our findings spread quickly, and the townsfolk gathered to hear the truth. Samuel Hawthorne came forward, publicly confessing his involvement in the conspiracy and confirming Victor's role in framing Eleanor. The diamond necklace was returned to its rightful place in the Blackwood family vault, a symbol of both the family's legacy and the justice that had finally been served. As the truth came to light, the atmosphere in the town began to shift. The sense of unease that had long haunted the community gave way to a feeling of relief and closure. Eleanor's name was cleared, and her memory was honored with a small ceremony at Blackwood Manor. Elliot and I stood by her grave, the rain having subsided to a gentle drizzle. The townsfolk gathered around, paying their respects to a woman who had been wronged and finally vindicated. Miss Turner, her eyes filled with tears, placed a bouquet of flowers on Eleanor's grave. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for giving Eleanor the justice she deserved." Elliot nodded solemnly. It was the right thing to do. No one should suffer for a crime they didn't commit. As the ceremony concluded, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. We had uncovered the truth, brought justice to a wronged soul, and restored peace to the community. But as we walked back to the manor, Elliot's expression grew thoughtful. "There's still one mystery left to solve," he said quietly. I turned to him, my curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" "Charles Blackwood's death," Elliot replied. "We know now that Eleanor's spirit was not responsible, but someone orchestrated his demise, and we need to find out who and why." I nodded, understanding the weight of his words. Our investigation was far from over. The shadows of Blackwood Manor still held secrets, and we were determined to uncover them. As we entered the manor, the flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls. The sense of foreboding that had lingered since our arrival was still present, a constant reminder that the past was not yet fully laid to rest. Elliot and I returned to our rooms, exhausted but resolute. The journey into the heart of Blackwood Manor had revealed much, but there was still more to uncover. We were prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, driven by our commitment to the truth and our desire to bring justice to those who had been wronged. The nights stretched on, and as I lay in bed, my mind raced with the possibilities of what lay ahead. The rain had ceased, and the manor was shrouded in an almost eerie silence. But within that silence, I felt a sense of determination and resolve. The morning sunlight broke through the thick canopy of trees surrounding Blackwood Manor, casting dappled patterns of light and shadow on the ground. Elliot and I awoke to the chirping of birds and the crisp, invigorating air of the Virginia countryside. The sense of foreboding that had lingered since our arrival was still present, but we felt a renewed determination to uncover the truth behind Charles Blackwood's death. As we made our way to the dining room for breakfast, we were greeted by the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries. Miss Turner was already seated at the head of the table, her usual stern expression softened by a faint smile. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, gesturing for us to join her. "I trust you slept well?" "Good morning, Miss Turner," Elliot replied, taking a seat. "We did, thank you. We made significant progress yesterday, but there are still many unanswered questions." Miss Turner's eyes clouded with concern. "I understand. Charles's death was a terrible tragedy, and I fear there may be more to it than meets the eye." Elliot nodded thoughtfully. "We need to delve deeper into Charles's life and relationships. There must be someone who had a motive to harm him." As we discussed our plan for the day, the door to the dining room creaked open, and a young woman entered. She was elegant and poised, with dark hair neatly tied back and a determined look in her eyes. "Good morning, Miss Turner," she said, her voice steady. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Emily," Miss Turner replied warmly. "This is Emily Blackwood, Charles's niece." "Emily, these are Mr. Brooks and Mr. Vasquez, who are investigating Charles's death." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Emily said, extending her hand. "I hope you can help bring some clarity to this terrible situation." "We'll do our best," Elliot assured her, shaking her hand. "Can you tell us more about your uncle and his relationships with others in the family?" Emily sighed, her expression pained. "My uncle was a kind and generous man, but he had his share of conflicts within the family. There were disagreements over the management of the estate and the direction of the family's business ventures. Some members of the family were resentful of his decisions. Do you know if anyone in particular had a strong motive to harm him? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Emily hesitated for a moment before speaking. There was tension between my uncle and my cousin Gregory. Gregory always felt that he was entitled to a larger share of the inheritance, and often clashed with Charles over financial matters. Elliot's eyes gleamed with interest. We should speak with Gregory and get a sense of his relationship with Charles. Where can we find him? He's staying in the guest house on the estate, Emily replied. I can take you there. After breakfast, Emily led us to the guest house, a smaller but equally grand building on the outskirts of the manor grounds. The path was lined with ancient oak trees, their gnarled branches creating a canopy overhead. As we approached the guest house, Emily paused, her expression troubled. Please be careful. Gregory can be volatile. Elliot nodded, his expression resolute. We'll handle it. Emily knocked on the door, and a moment later, it was answered by a tall, well-built man with a stern expression. His dark eyes narrowed as he took in our presence. Gregory, these are Mr. Brooks and Mr. Vasquez, Emily introduced us. They're investigating Uncle Charles's death. Gregory's jaw tightened, and he crossed his arms defensively. What do you want to know? We'd like to ask you a few questions about your relationship with Charles, Elliot said calmly. Can we come in? Gregory hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let us in. The interior of the guest house was tastefully decorated, but there was an air of tension that seemed to hang in the air. Please have a seat, Gregory said, gesturing to the sitting area. Let's get this over with. We took our seats, and Elliot wasted no time in getting to the point. Emily mentioned that there were some disagreements between you and Charles over the management of the estate. Can you tell us more about that? Gregory's expression darkened. My uncle was stubborn and set in his ways. He refused to listen to reason and made decisions that I felt were detrimental to the family's future. We argued, yes, but that doesn't mean I wanted him dead. Elliot's gaze remained steady. Did you ever threaten him or express a desire to harm him? No, Gregory replied firmly. I may have disagreed with him, but I respected him. He was family. There was a moment of silence as Elliot weighed Gregory's words. Do you know if anyone else in the family had a motive to harm Charles? Gregory's eyes flickered with uncertainty. I can't say for sure, but there were others who weren't happy with his decisions. My Aunt Victoria was particularly vocal about her displeasure. Where can we find Victoria? I asked, taking note of the new lead. She's staying in the main house, Gregory replied. But I warn you, she's not easy to deal with. We thanked Gregory for his time and made our way back to the manor. The day had grown warmer, and the sun cast long shadows across the grounds. As we walked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The more we uncovered, the more complicated the web of relationships and motives became. Upon returning to the manor, we found Victoria Blackwood in the drawing room, sipping tea and reading a book. She was an elegant woman in her 60s, with sharp features and a haughty demeanor. Mrs. Blackwood, may we have a word? Elliot asked, his tone polite but firm. Victoria looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. What is it you want to know? We're investigating Charles's death and would like to ask you a few questions about your relationship with him, Elliot explained. Victoria's lips pursed in a thin line. Charles and I had our differences, but I had no reason to harm him. He was my brother-in-law, after all. Gregory mentioned that you were displeased with some of Charles's decisions regarding the estate, I said, trying to gauge her reaction. Victoria's expression hardened. Displeased? That's an understatement. Charles made reckless decisions that put the family's future at risk. I voiced my concerns, but he never listened. Did you ever threaten him or suggest that he should step down from managing the estate? Elliot asked, his gaze unwavering. Victoria sighed, her frustration evident. I may have suggested that he consider stepping down in favor of someone more capable, but I never threatened him. I may not have agreed with his decisions, but I would never stoop to violence. As we continued our questioning, it became clear that Victoria's grievances were genuine but not necessarily indicative of a murderous intent. However, her animosity toward Charles added another layer to the complex relationships within the Blackwood family. After concluding our interview with Victoria, Elliot and I decided to take a walk around the manor grounds to clear our minds and discuss our findings. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. We have two potential suspects, both with motives tied to financial disagreements, Elliot mused as we walked. But we need more concrete evidence to link either of them to Charles's death. Maybe we should take a closer look at Charles's personal effects, I suggested. There might be something in his study or bedroom that could provide us with more clues. Elliot nodded in agreement. Good idea. Let's start with his study. We made our way to Charles's study, a grand room filled with shelves of books and ornate furniture. The scent of leather and aged paper filled the air, and the heavy drapes were drawn, casting the room in shadow. Elliot began by examining the desk, carefully sifting through papers and documents. I turned my attention to the bookshelves, scanning the titles for anything that might stand out. As I reached for a particularly old volume, my fingers brushed against a hidden latch. A section of the bookshelf swung open, revealing a concealed compartment. Inside, I found a small, leather-bound journal. Elliot, look at this, I called, holding up the journal. Elliot joined me, his eyes widening in surprise. A hidden journal? This could be significant. We carefully opened the journal, the pages filled with Charles's neat, precise handwriting. The entries detailed his thoughts and observations, offering a glimpse into his state of mind in the weeks leading up to his death. One entry in particular caught our attention. It was dated just a few days before Charles's death and mentioned a confrontation with an unknown individual. June 15, 1971, had another argument with him today. His demands are becoming increasingly unreasonable. I fear for my safety and the future of the estate. Elliot's expression grew serious. This entry suggests that Charles was being threatened by someone. We need to find out who him refers to. As we continued reading, we found several more entries that hinted at a growing sense of unease and fear. Charles mentioned receiving anonymous letters and phone calls, all with veiled threats and demands. We need to track down these letters and phone records, Elliot said decisively. They could lead us to the person who was threatening Charles. Our investigation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Miss Turner entered the study, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Mr. Brooks, Mr. Vasquez, is everything all right? She asked, her gaze flicking between us and the open journal. We've made some progress, Elliot replied, holding up the journal. This belonged to Charles. It mentions that he was being threatened by someone. We need to find out who him refers to and track down any letters or phone records related to these threats. Miss Turner's eyes widened in surprise. Charles never mentioned any threats to me. This is deeply troubling. Do you know if Charles kept any correspondence or records of phone calls? I asked. There is a small office adjacent to his bedroom where he handled his personal affairs, Miss Turner said. You might find what you're looking for there. With renewed determination, Elliot and I made our way to Charles's private office. The room was modest compared to the rest of the manor, with a simple desk, filing cabinets, and a telephone. The scent of tobacco lingered in the air, a reminder of Charles's habitual pipe smoking. Elliot began by examining the desk, carefully opening each drawer and inspecting its contents. I turned my attention to the filing cabinets, methodically sifting through folders and documents. After a thorough search, I discovered a stack of letters tied together with a piece of twine. The letters were addressed to Charles, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. I handed the bundle to Elliot, who began reading through them. These letters are full of veiled threats and demands, Elliot said, his brow furrowing. The sender insists that Charles comply with their demands or face dire consequences. Do the letters mention any specific demands? I asked, leaning in to read over his shoulder. They reference financial matters, specifically regarding the management of the estate and investments, Elliot explained. It seems the sender was trying to extort money from Charles. As we continued reading, we came across a particularly chilling letter that mentioned a meeting at a secluded location on the estate. The letter wasn't signed, but it provided detailed instructions for the meeting. "This must be the confrontation Charles mentioned in his journal," Elliot said, his eyes narrowing. "We need to find out who sent these letters and why they were extorting Charles." Our attention turned to the telephone on the desk. Elliot carefully examined the call logs, taking note of any unfamiliar numbers. We made a list of the numbers and decided to investigate further. Back in the drawing room, we found a directory of local and regional phone numbers. With painstaking precision, we cross-referenced the numbers from the call logs with the directory, hoping to identify the caller. After several hours of diligent work, we identified one of the numbers as belonging to a local attorney named Frederick Barnes. The name was unfamiliar to us, but we knew it was a lead worth pursuing. "We should pay Mr. Barnes a visit," Elliot said, his expression resolute. "If he's involved in this extortion scheme, we need to find out how and why." As the sun began to set, we made our way to Frederick Barnes's office in the nearby town. The building was an imposing structure, its exterior hinting at the wealth and influence of its occupants. We approached the receptionist, explaining that we needed to speak with Mr. Barnes about a confidential matter. After a brief wait, we were escorted to Frederick Barnes's office. The attorney was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, with sharp features and a shrewd gaze. He rose from his desk to greet us, his expression guarded. "Mr. Brooks, Mr. Vasquez, to what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. "We're investigating the death of Charles Blackwood," Elliot said, wasting no time with pleasantries. "We have reason to believe you were in contact with him regarding a series of threats and demands." Barnes's eyes flickered with surprise before settling into a composed demeanor. "I assure you, gentlemen, I had no involvement in any threats or extortion. My dealings with Charles were strictly professional." Elliot's gaze remained unwavering. "We found letters and call records that link you to the threats. We need the truth, Mr. Barnes." Barnes sighed, his composure wavering for a moment. "Very well. I did correspond with Charles, but it was not to threaten him. He sought my legal advice on a delicate matter involving a potential lawsuit against the estate." "A lawsuit?" I echoed, my curiosity piqued. "What was the basis of the lawsuit?" "It involved a dispute over land ownership," Barnes explained. "A former employee of the Blackwood estate claimed that he was wrongfully dismissed and that he had rightful ownership of a portion of the land." "Who was this former employee?" Elliot asked, sensing a potential lead. "His name was William Hawthorne," Barnes replied. "He worked on the estate for many years before being dismissed under contentious circumstances." Elliot and I exchanged a knowing glance. The connection to Samuel Hawthorne was unmistakable. We had uncovered a new thread in the tangled web of relationships and motives surrounding Charles's death. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Barnes," Elliot said, rising from his seat. "We appreciate your honesty." As we left Barnes's office, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The connections between Charles, Samuel, and William Hawthorne pointed to a deeper conspiracy that extended beyond the immediate family. With the new lead in hand, we returned to Blackwood Manor, determined to uncover the truth behind William Hawthorne's claims and his connection to Samuel. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the manor as we approached. Back in our rooms, we reviewed the information we had gathered. The letters, the journal, and the call records all pointed to a complex web of deceit and manipulation. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that Charles's death was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger scheme. "We need to speak with Samuel again," Elliot said, his expression resolute. "He may have more information about his brother's dispute with Charles." The following morning, we made our way to Samuel Hawthorne's cottage. The air was crisp and cool, the scent of pine and earth filling our lungs. As we approached, we noticed that the door was slightly ajar. Elliot motioned for me to stay back as he cautiously entered the cottage. The interior was dimly lit, and the scent of tobacco smoke lingered in the air. Samuel was seated in a worn armchair, a look of resignation on his face. Mr. Hawthorne, we need to ask you about your brother, William, Elliot said, his tone calm but insistent. Samuel's eyes flickered with a mixture of surprise and sorrow. William, he always felt that he was wronged by the Blackwoods. He believed that part of the land rightfully belonged to our family, but Charles refused to acknowledge his claim. Did William threaten Charles or make any demands? I asked, leaning in to hear his response. Samuel sighed heavily. William was desperate. He believed that the only way to get justice was to pressure Charles into acknowledging his claim. I tried to dissuade him, but he was determined. Do you know if William had any involvement in Charles's death? Elliot pressed, his gaze unwavering. Samuel's expression grew pained. I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't put it past him. William was always driven by a sense of entitlement and resentment. Elliot nodded thoughtfully. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Hawthorne. We'll continue our investigation. As we left the cottage, the weight of the revelations hung heavy in the air. The connections between Charles, Samuel, and William were becoming clearer, but the full extent of the conspiracy remained elusive. Back at Blackwood Manor, we reviewed our findings and discussed our next steps. The information we had gathered pointed to a complex web of relationships, motives, and deceptions that span generations. Elliot's expression grew resolute. We need to dig deeper into William's claims and uncover any evidence that links him to Charles's death. There may be more hidden secrets within the estate. With renewed determination, we set out to continue our investigation, driven by our commitment to uncovering the truth and bringing justice to those who had been wronged. As dawn broke over Blackwood Manor, the early morning light cast long shadows across the grounds. The tension that had been building since our arrival hung thick in the air, and Elliot and I were both keenly aware that we were drawing closer to the truth. There was a palpable sense of urgency as we prepared for another day of investigation. Over breakfast, we discussed our plan of action. Miss Turner joined us, her usual stern demeanor softened by a hint of concern. Mr. Brooks, Mr. Vasquez, she began, her voice steady. I can't thank you enough for your efforts to uncover the truth, but I must admit, I'm worried about what you might find. The Blackwood family has always been shrouded in secrets, and some of them may be dangerous. We appreciate your concern, Miss Turner, Elliot replied, but we are determined to bring justice to Charles and Eleanor, no matter the cost. Miss Turner nodded, a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask. I want to help in any way I can. After finishing our meal, Elliot and I decided to revisit the study and examine the journal entries once more. There were still lingering questions about Charles's final days, and we hoped to find additional clues that might shed light on the events leading up to his death. As we pored over the journal, one particular entry stood out. It detailed a meeting that Charles had arranged with an unnamed individual at a secluded spot on the estate. The entry was filled with a sense of foreboding, as if Charles had known that the meeting would be dangerous. June 18, 1971. I've agreed to meet with him tonight. I'm hesitant, but I have no choice. He holds too much power over me. I must protect the family and the estate, even if it costs me my life. Elliot's expression grew serious. This meeting could be the key to understanding what happened to Charles. We need to find this secluded spot and see if there are any clues left behind. Miss Turner joined us as we made our way to the spot described in the journal. It was a remote area on the outskirts of the estate, surrounded by dense trees and overgrown vegetation. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the sound of birdsong filled the air. As we searched the area, we noticed a small clearing with signs of recent activity. The ground was disturbed, and there were faint traces of footprints leading away from the clearing. Elliot knelt down to examine the footprints, his keen eyes taking in every detail. These footprints are fresh, no more than a day old. Someone else has been here recently. We continued our search, and I soon discovered a piece of torn fabric caught on a thorny bush. The fabric was dark and coarse, and it seemed out of place in the otherwise pristine surroundings. Elliot took the fabric from my hand and examined it closely. This looks like it came from a workman's coat. It could belong to one of the staff or someone who works on the estate. Miss Turner frowned, her brow furrowing in thought. There are several workers who come and go, but there's one man in particular who has been acting suspiciously. His name is Henry, and he has been with the estate for many years. Where can we find him? Elliot asked, his gaze unwavering. He's likely working in the stables, Miss Turner replied, but be careful. Henry can be volatile, especially when confronted. With a sense of purpose, we made our way to the stables, the sound of our footsteps echoing on the cobblestone path. The stables were bustling with activity, and the scent of hay and horses filled the air. We found Henry tending to one of the horses, his back turned to us. He was a burly man with a rough demeanor, and there was an air of unease about him. Henry, Elliot called out, his voice steady. We need to speak with you. Henry turned to face us, his expression guarded. What do you want? We have some questions about the night Charles Blackwood died, Elliot said, his tone firm but non-threatening. Henry's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and defiance. I don't know anything about that. I was working in the stables, as usual. Is that so? Elliot replied, holding up the piece of torn fabric. We found this near the spot where Charles met with someone the night he died. It matches the coat you're wearing now. Henry's face paled, and he took a step back. I don't know what you're talking about. I wasn't there. Elliot's gaze remained steady. We have reason to believe that you were involved in the meeting with Charles. If you have any information that can help us, now is the time to come forward. Henry's hands trembled, and he glanced around nervously. All right. I was there, but I didn't kill him. I swear. Tell us what happened, I urged, stepping closer. Henry took a deep breath, his voice shaky. I was supposed to meet Charles that night. He had been receiving threats, and he wanted my help to confront the man behind them. When I arrived, Charles was already dead. There was nothing I could do. Who was the man threatening Charles? Elliot asked, his eyes narrowing. Henry hesitated, his fear palpable. It was William Hawthorne. He believed that the Blackwoods had wronged his family, and he wanted revenge. He threatened Charles, demanding money and land, but Charles refused to give in. Elliot's expression grew determined. We need to find William and bring him to justice. Do you know where he might be? Henry nodded reluctantly. He has a hideout in the woods, not far from here. It's a small cabin, well hidden among the trees. With this new information, we set out to find William Hawthorne's hideout. The forest was dense and overgrown, the path winding and treacherous. The sound of rustling leaves and distant bird calls filled the air, creating an atmosphere of tension and anticipation. After what felt like hours of searching, we finally spotted the cabin nestled among the trees. It was a modest structure, its exterior weathered and worn. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, and there was no sign of movement inside. Elliot motioned for me to stay back as he approached the cabin cautiously. He knocked on the door, his hand resting on the hilt of his cane, ready to defend himself if necessary. After a tense moment, the door creaked open, revealing a gaunt, disheveled man with wild eyes. It was William Hawthorne, his expression a mix of fear and defiance. William Hawthorne, we're here to talk about Charles Blackwood, Elliot said firmly. We know about the threats and demands you made. It's time to come clean. William's eyes darted between us, and he took a step back, his hands trembling. I didn't mean for things to go this far. I just wanted what was rightfully ours. What happened that night? I asked, my voice steady. William's shoulders slumped in defeat. I confronted Charles, demanding that he acknowledge my family's claim to the land. He refused, and we argued. In the heat of the moment, I lost control. I didn't mean to kill him, but he fell and hit his head. Elliot's gaze remained steady. You need to turn yourself in and face the consequences of your actions. It's the only way to bring closure to this tragedy. William hesitated for a moment before nodding reluctantly. You're right. I'll go with you. With William in custody, we returned to Blackwood Manor, the weight of our discoveries hanging heavy in the air. The truth had finally come to light, and justice was within reach. Back at the manor, we informed Miss Turner and Emily of our findings. Their expressions were a mix of relief and sorrow, knowing that the mystery had been solved, but also grieving the loss of Charles and the dark legacy of the Blackwood family. As William was taken into custody by the authorities, Elliot and I stood by Eleanor's grave, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The shadows of the past had been brought into the light, and the spirits of Blackwood Manor could finally find peace. But our work was not yet done. The legacy of the Blackwood family was filled with secrets and tragedies, and we were determined to continue our quest for truth and justice, no matter where it led us. The morning dawned with a sense of renewed purpose. The heavy burden of the past few days seemed to lift slightly as Elliot and I prepared for the day's tasks. Our mission was clear. We needed to gather the final pieces of evidence to bring William Hawthorne to justice and ensure that the truth was fully revealed. After a quick breakfast, we made our way to the police station, where William Hawthorne was being held. The authorities had agreed to let us question him further, hoping that our expertise might uncover additional information. As we entered the interrogation room, we were greeted by Inspector Harrison, who had been overseeing the case. His stern expression softened slightly as he nodded in acknowledgement. "Mr. Brooks, Mr. Vasquez," he said, "thank you for your continued efforts. We believe that William may have more to tell us." William sat at the table, his hands cuffed and his eyes downcast. The weight of his actions seemed to bear heavily upon him, and there was a sense of resignation in his demeanor. "William," Elliot began, his voice calm and steady, "we need to understand the full extent of your involvement in Charles's death. It's time to come clean." William's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I've told you everything I know. Charles and I argued and he fell. It was an accident." Elliot leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "We need more than that, William. We know that you were pressuring Charles for money and land. What were you planning to do if he didn't comply?" William's shoulders slumped, and he sighed heavily. "I was desperate. I felt that my family had been wronged for generations, and I wanted to make things right. But I never intended for things to go this far." "Who else was involved?" I asked, my voice steady. "Did anyone help you or encourage you to pressure Charles?" William hesitated, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "There was one person, Samuel. He was my brother and he believed in our cause. He helped me draft the letters and plan the confrontations. But he didn't know about the final meeting. I kept that from him." Elliot and I exchanged a knowing glance. Samuel's involvement added another layer to the complex web of deceit and manipulation that had plagued the Blackwood family. "Thank you, William," Elliot said, rising from his seat. "We'll take it from here." As we left the interrogation room, Inspector Harrison pulled us aside. "What do you make of his confession?" Elliot's expression was thoughtful. "It's clear that William acted out of desperation and a misguided sense of justice. But we need to verify his claims and gather more evidence to ensure that the full truth is revealed." Inspector Harrison nodded in agreement. "We'll continue our investigation and keep you updated on any developments." With that, Elliot and I returned to Blackwood Manor, determined to uncover any remaining secrets. The estate was shrouded in an eerie silence, the weight of the past hanging heavy in the air. We decided to revisit the hidden room where we had found Eleanor's photograph, hoping that it might hold more clues. As we carefully searched the room, we discovered a false bottom in one of the old trunks. Inside, we found a collection of letters and documents, all bearing the Blackwood family crest. Elliot carefully examined the letters, his eyes narrowing as he read through them. These letters are addressed to various members of the Blackwood family. They detail financial transactions, land disputes, and personal grievances. It's clear that the family has been embroiled in conflict for generations. One letter in particular caught my attention. It was addressed to Charles and mentioned a hidden ledger that contained details of the family's financial dealings. The letter hinted that the ledger was kept in a secret compartment in Charles's study. "We need to find that ledger," I said, my voice filled with determination. "It might contain the evidence we need to fully understand the motivations behind Charles's death." With renewed purpose, we made our way to Charles's study. The room was filled with the scent of aged paper and leather, a testament to the Blackwood family's long history. We began our search, carefully examining every nook and cranny. After what felt like hours of searching, Elliot discovered a hidden compartment behind one of the bookshelves. Inside, we found the ledger, its pages filled with detailed accounts of financial transactions and land dealings. As we examined the ledger, it became clear that Charles had been involved in a series of complex financial arrangements aimed at securing the family's future. But there were also entries that detailed payments made to various individuals, including Samuel and William Hawthorne. These payments suggest that Charles was trying to buy their silence, Elliot said, his eyes narrowing. He was willing to pay them off to avoid a public scandal. We carefully documented our findings and returned to the drawing room to review the evidence. Miss Turner joined us, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Have you found anything?" she asked, her voice steady. "We've uncovered a hidden ledger that details Charles's financial dealings," Elliot explained. "It appears that he was making payments to Samuel and William Hawthorne in an attempt to buy their silence." Miss Turner's eyes widened in surprise. "I had no idea. Charles never mentioned any of this to me." "It's clear that the Blackwood family has been plagued by conflict and deceit for generations," I added. "But we believe that we now have the evidence we need to fully understand the motivations behind Charles's death." As we continued our discussion, a sense of clarity began to emerge. The tangled web of relationships, motives, and secrets that had surrounded the Blackwood family was finally being unraveled. With the evidence in hand, we presented our findings to Inspector Harrison. He listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each new revelation. "This ledger is the key to understanding the full scope of the conspiracy," Inspector Harrison said, his voice steady. "With this information, we can build a solid case against William and ensure that justice is served." The following days were a whirlwind of activity as the authorities worked to piece together the final elements of the case. William was formally charged with manslaughter, and Samuel was arrested for his involvement in the extortion scheme. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the atmosphere at Blackwood Manor began to shift. The sense of tension and unease that had plagued the estate gave way to a feeling of relief and closure. The truth had finally come to light, and the spirits of the past could find peace. Elliot and I stood by Eleanor's grave once more, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. The shadows of Blackwood Manor had been brought into the light, and justice had been served. "Miguel," Elliot said, his voice thoughtful, "we've uncovered a great deal of darkness in this family's history, but we've also brought closure to those who were wronged. That's something to be proud of." I nodded in agreement, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "We've done good work here, Elliot, but I have a feeling that our journey is far from over." As we left the graveyard, the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the estate. The future of Blackwood Manor was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The legacy of deceit and conflict had been broken, and a new chapter was ready to begin. Our work as detectives was never truly done, and I knew that there would always be new mysteries to uncover and new truths to reveal. But for now, we could take solace in the knowledge that we had brought justice to the Blackwood family and helped to heal the wounds of the past. The journey into the heart of Blackwood Manor had been long and difficult, but it had also been rewarding. And as we looked toward the future, we knew that we would face whatever challenges came our way, driven by our shared commitment to truth and justice. As the legal proceedings came to a close, the atmosphere at Blackwood Manor began to shift. The tension and unease that had haunted the estate for so long slowly gave way to a sense of relief and closure. With William and Samuel Hawthorne facing justice, the truth had finally come to light, and the dark legacy of the Blackwood family could begin to heal. Elliot and I spent the following days wrapping up our investigation and ensuring that all the loose ends were tied. The ledger we had discovered in Charles's study had provided crucial evidence, and Inspector Harrison had successfully built a solid case against the Hawthorne brothers. One crisp autumn morning, Elliot and I found ourselves standing by Eleanor's grave once more. The sun cast a warm, golden glow over the grounds, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak trees that surrounded the manor. It's hard to believe how much has happened since we arrived, I remarked, my voice tinged with a sense of awe. Elliot nodded thoughtfully. We've uncovered a great deal of darkness in this family's history, but we've also brought closure to those who were wronged. That's something to be proud of. As we stood there, reflecting on the events that had unfolded, Miss Turner approached us, her expression a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Mr. Brooks, Mr. Vasquez, she began, her voice steady. I can't thank you enough for your efforts to uncover the truth and bring justice to Charles and Eleanor. The Blackwood family owes you a great debt. It was our duty, Elliot replied, his tone sincere. We were determined to bring the truth to light and help this family find peace. Miss Turner nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The estate will never be the same, but perhaps now it can move forward. The shadows of the past no longer have a hold on us. As we walked back to the manor, we were joined by Emily Blackwood. Her demeanor had changed since our first meeting, and there was a newfound sense of determination in her eyes. Mr. Brooks, Mr. Vasquez, she said, her voice filled with resolve. I've decided to take on the responsibility of managing the estate. I want to ensure that the Blackwood legacy is one of honor and integrity, not deceit and conflict. That's a noble endeavor, Elliot replied, a hint of pride in his voice. I have no doubt that you will succeed. With the future of Blackwood Manor in capable hands, Elliot and I began to prepare for our departure. As we packed our belongings, I couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet satisfaction. Our time at the manor had been filled with challenges and revelations, but we had emerged victorious, having brought justice to those who had been wronged. On our final evening at the manor, a small gathering was held in the grand dining room. The townsfolk, who had long lived in the shadow of the Blackwood family's secrets, had come to pay their respects and celebrate the resolution of the mystery. Elliot and I stood by the fireplace, the flickering flames casting a warm glow over the room. Miss Turner raised a glass in a toast, her voice filled with gratitude. To Mr. Brooks and Mr. Vasquez, she said, her eyes shining, for their dedication to uncovering the truth and bringing justice to our family. We are forever in your debt. The room erupted in applause, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey into the heart of Blackwood Manor had been long and arduous, but it had also been rewarding in ways I could never have imagined. As the evening drew to a close, Elliot and I took a moment to step outside and breathe in the cool night air. The stars shone brightly overhead, casting a silvery glow over the estate. Miguel, Elliot said, his voice thoughtful, our work as detectives is never truly done. There will always be new mysteries to uncover and new truths to reveal. But for now, we can take solace in the knowledge that we've brought justice to the Blackwood family and helped to heal the wounds of the past. I nodded in agreement, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. We've done good work here, Elliot, and I have a feeling that there are many more adventures waiting for us. As we left Blackwood Manor the following morning, the sun rose over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light on the path ahead. The future was filled with endless possibilities, and I knew that with Elliot by my side, we would face whatever challenges came our way, driven by our shared commitment to truth and justice. The journey into the heart of Blackwood Manor had been a defining chapter in our lives, and it had forged an unbreakable bond between us. As we ventured into the unknown, we carried with us the lessons we had learned and the memories of those we had helped. The shadows of the past had been banished, and a new chapter was ready to begin. And as Elliot and I set out on our next adventure, we knew that we would face whatever came our way with courage, determination, and unwavering resolve.